everyone. Thank you so much for joining our live webinar today. My name is Lindsay Locke. I'm Pluralsight's webinar manager, and I'm going to hand everything over shortly here to Don Jones, our Director of Technical Curriculum at Pluralsight. Don, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, good to be here.
All right, so Don is going to be giving us a quick preview of his conversation he'll be having at Pluralsight Live. Today we're talking about demystifying DevOps. So Don, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Cool. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everybody. As Lindsay said, my name is Don Jones. I'm a Director of Technical Curriculum at Pluralsight, which means I help build out our company's learning plans. I've been in the industry for a little over 20 years. I'm a Microsoft MVP award recipient. And I kind of wanted to just, DevOps is something I've been working with a lot lately. I help run a nonprofit called the DevOps Collective. We run a conference and have a bunch of publications. And it's obviously something that's becoming a bigger and bigger meme within our industry. But, it's like a lot of things. It's like the cloud word when that was a big meme in our industry. It gets co-opted a lot. It gets misused. It gets, taken over by marketing teams for companies that want to sell you stuff. So the session that I'm doing at Pluralsight Live is actually an exploration of what a functioning real-world DevOps team actually looks like. But for today, I just wanted to kind of touch on some of those things, but just really talk about what DevOps is and isn't. I'm hoping a lot of you will drop a whole bunch of questions in the queue as we go so that we can really make this an interactive discussion a little bit. Lindsay, you had a little bit you could tell people about Pluralsight Live too, since that's where this is kind of pulled off of, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So Pluralsight Live is our very first in-person user conference. It takes place in Salt Lake City at the Grand America, September 19th through 21st. And we have a special promo code for webinar attendees. It's on your screen right now, so if you want to screen grab that, it's PS Live 2017 WBNR. It gives you a huge discount on the conference. I don't think you can get a cheaper discount off of it anywhere else. And we'll throw that up again a little bit later. There's actually a link directly on your screen to register as well. And so I wanted to share that with everyone. And like Don said, this webinar is an office hours webinar. It's Q&A based. We want to answer your questions directly on the topic of DevOps. So please submit your questions, and we're going to take them throughout the entire presentation. So with that, let's go ahead and move forward. Do we still have you on the call, Don?
Yep. Oh, I'm still here. I just pushed my mute button. Apparently that's not good. Yeah, so one of the things that you get into, and actually, I'm going to take a question because this is a good way to talk about this. When you start talking about DevOps teams, I think it's important to understand that DevOps is a practice. It's a philosophy. It's an approach to managing IT. You can have a team that functions in a DevOps fashion, and you can have teams in your organization that don't. You can certainly have some products within your organization operating on a DevOps style cadence and using those approaches, and you can have other things in your organization that don't operate that way. That's totally fine. But what you can't have is, and this is the question here, Ben asks if I would comment on the usage of DevOps as a position. So hiring a DevOps engineer versus a role, the company does DevOps. And that's kind of the thing. I don't think there's any such thing as a DevOps engineer. Now, that said, you get companies like Microsoft and these other big vendors, and you get large employers, especially large enterprises, and they go, okay, what are some of the skills we would need in order to do this DevOps approach? And you start talking about skills like IT automation. You start talking about different tools and things that people use. And so the companies, just for convenience sake, will say, okay, well, a person who exhibits those skills will be a DevOps engineer. That's fine. I understand that. We need a way to describe the skill set that contributes to the approach. The problem is you can't just have a DevOps engineer and do DevOps, right? The development team has got to be lined up around this. The people who are providing automation, the people who are running the databases, the people who are managing the project, everybody has to be taking this approach. It's not like you can just hire one guy or gal and say, okay, well, we have someone who knows PowerShell and who knows Terraform and Ansible, and so, yay, we're DevOps. That's not the case. DevOps isn't a thing you can buy, and it's not a person you can hire. You will have to hire people with the right capabilities to contribute to this approach, but that's not the all of it. It would be like saying, well, we have a bookkeeper, so we do finance. Well, no, finance is a lot more than just bookkeeping, right? It's also financial planning and analysis and all these other things. There's a lot of capabilities involved in the approach. And that's really what it comes down to, I think. And folks, do feel free to drop questions in here. I really want to make this as conversive as possible. So how can a company, David asks, how can a company that does not do dev benefit from DevOps practices? And that is a great question. In the classic definition of DevOps, like if you go back and you read the Phoenix Project or any of the other really seminal books that have kind of kicked this off as a movement, they generally always focus on an organization that is developing software internally. So you think about your Spotifys of the world and your Pandoras and even companies like Pluralsight where there is a development effort going on and the goal is to get the result of that development, an app of some kind, to its customers. So that's the classic DevOps picture. However, as we start moving into larger scale compute, right? It's not just 5 servers sitting in the data center. It's 100 servers, each of which are running 100 virtual machines and a couple of hundred containers. And the number of things that we have to manage as IT operations people is growing larger and larger and larger. The only way that we can start to really manage that consistently and reliably is to do so declaratively. In other words, we're not just running around pushing buttons. We're writing scripts. We're using policy-based things like chef or puppet or desired state configuration. So it's that whole infrastructure from code, meaning we're writing code and the result of that code is not an app, it's our infrastructure. Well, because we're writing code, DevOps can play in. DevOps can be a huge piece of that conversation because code is being written. And even though the deliverable of that code is not an application, it's still code and it's still producing something. And so it can still fall under that DevOps style of practice. So DevOps practices are potentially applicable to any company whatsoever. I think the thing you have to be really careful of is understanding what DevOps is and what it means, and some of the trade-offs that you have to make if you're going to go down this route. I think we've got a slide that summarizes some of these. This is from a course that we have in the Pluralsight library called DevOps, the Big Picture. It's by Richard Serotter. And he kind of lays out 6 principles of DevOps. And I tend to describe these a little bit differently, but they wind up lining up about the same. And kind of what it comes down to is this. Traditionally, IT has been terrified of change. We don't like change because change is how problems come up, right? If we just change nothing ever, then it all should continue working. Unless we have a change like a hardware failure that makes a server go offline, which is still a change, and that's a change we can usually, we can detect easily. Look, there's smoke coming out of the back of it. That's different. That must be the problem. So we tend to hate change, but business is change, and the information technology industry should support that change. We should not say that we have to manage change to a degree that we can handle it. We should say we can handle any kind of change. And that might mean there's a failure at some point because we changed something incorrectly, but it also means that we have the capability to recover from that just as quickly and roll back to a prior good version. So if you just take your infrastructure, for example, if you deploy some change and you did that via a script, then you can roll back to the previous version of that script and redeploy the infrastructure to the last known good version. And that's really what DevOps is all about. It's about trusting your code, but not trusting that everything is going to be perfect every single time. It's assuming that there will be failure. It's failing with style and grace and being able to recover quickly. It's also about empowerment. And I think this is the big cultural thing that a lot of companies don't understand. You can't do DevOps. You cannot say that you're doing DevOps unless you are willing to empower your people. So let's take the classic model where you've got developers in the organization and you've got operations people who are supporting them with automation. The idea with DevOps is that as soon as the developer hits commit on their code, they're like, this is the release, it's ready to go to production, I'm going to commit it. And then the operations team has taken over with operations. So all the automation kicks in. The developer checks their code into source control. There are some automated tests that have been checked in with that. So there's an automated test environment that spins up. It compiles the application. It runs the automated tests. If the automated tests pass, then the app is deployed into production, meaning there's no operational role. There's no meeting of the ITIL change advisory board or the executive committee. The developers said it's ready to go. They've got tests passed, so as far as we know, this thing's good to go. And automation carries it from the hands of the developer all the way through to the end user of the application. Could be the same thing if all you're doing is infrastructure. We're making a change to the infrastructure. We've checked in our code. We've spun up a test environment. We've validated that the code produces the infrastructure we want. We're now putting that into production, and there it goes. So once you check in your code, it's all automated from that point. That's the idea with DevOps. If your company's culture can't wrap their heads around that and can't come to trust that and create that level of empowerment and accountability, then you can't do DevOps. You can't have the nice things unless your company is philosophically okay with these things. It's unfortunately just the way it is. So here's a good question. My organization manages several legacy applications. They've been in existence for several years. They're fairly stable. The team's very comfortable with how things have been working. I'm tasked with changing how we do software development and to implement a DevOps mindset. What would be some typical challenges I will run into that I've seen with other companies and teams? Typically, culture. The problem with moving to DevOps is in people's heads. If you work for an organization that has not embraced the idea of automation and embraced it as a positive thing, DevOps is terrifying. Because you think, well, geez, if we deploy an application, that takes us 2 weeks to do. So if it breaks, it's going to take us 2 weeks to deploy a working version. You can't do DevOps with that attitude. If you look at some of the statistics that Puppet puts out in their annual report on DevOps, companies that move to a DevOps footing typically move from something like 3 to 4 major releases per year to something like 200. Like you are constantly releasing code. I'm sure everybody on the call, and Lindsay, you've got an iPhone or an Android phone, right?
Oh, of course.
Some kind of smartphone.
iPhone.
So
yeah.
How often are you getting app updates on that thing?
How often do I get them, or how often do I actually update it?
How often do the updates show up? Like hourly, right? It's like every hour there's a new badge for an app that needs updated. Well, and that's because a lot of these startup companies are smaller. They don't have a lot of legacy cultural baggage, and a lot of them are doing DevOps. The Spotify app gets updated almost constantly, and it's just little things, and that's kind of a neat thing too. Part of DevOps is that, the reason we release constantly is because we release just a little bit. We do a little bit and release it, and a little bit and release it. So if something does break, you're pretty sure what caused the change because you didn't change a whole lot right then. And you see that all the time with apps on phones. A release will come out, it'll break, and then like a few hours later or the next day, another release will come out that fixed what they broke. And that's what you have to be okay with. You have to be okay with continuous improvement. And the idea is that once you find a bug like that, you write an automated test so that that bug will never not be caught again. And those automated tests serve as your kind of institutional memory. They help the company remember what has gone wrong in the past, and they automate the process of making sure it won't happen again. It's about making decisions based on that type of data and on what customers need and being able to move very quickly in very small steps. Whereas a lot of our legacy approaches are moving very slowly in very giant steps. And that's kind of different. How can you apply DevOps practices for consulting organizations that don't develop their own software products? Again, anytime, if you're doing anything that is code and code is producing something, or your customer, so if you're a consultant, your customers are doing that, then that's where DevOps can fit. The idea is I don't like to describe DevOps as dev plus ops. I don't see it as dev people doing ops, and I don't see it as ops people who just know how to code. DevOps is its own thing, and it means that the development of code and the operations that get the code into production are all one unit. Everybody's on the same team, and that's really what the Pluralsight Live talk is all about. Is DevOps more than anything. Like if you want a simple soundbite you can take to the boss, DevOps is an org chart. I can walk in and if you show me your org chart, I can tell you if you're doing DevOps or not. I don't need to ask if you're using Ansible or Terraform or containers or PowerShell or Python or whatever else. I don't need to ask what kind of things you do. All I need to do is look at your org chart. Your org chart is what tells me if you're doing it or not. How does company size, age, funding, product needs, traffic, and all that, how does all that affect the need to think about DevOps? I'm not even sure what it would mean to prioritize DevOps, but that's how I'm thinking my question. So it becomes more difficult to implement DevOps with older, larger, late-stage companies, particularly ones that, let's say you work for JP Morgan Chase, a gigantic bank. When they push out an update to the website, it just has to work, full stop. They can't have customers streaming into branches to do stuff that they're supposed to be doing on the website because the branches can't scale. So it gets harder to flip over when you're in that late stage, older, larger, super scale, super mission critical type of company. Younger, smaller, newer companies are easier because they have fewer dependencies. They can set a different expectation with their customer on what that sort of thing is supposed to look like. So, but that doesn't mean you can't do it, right? So to take, again, a large bank as an example, a giant bank like Bank of America might not be able to stand up and say, tomorrow we're all doing DevOps. It'd be impossible. It'd be like physically impossible. You can't turn a ship like that. What they could do though is say, hey, we're going to take our mobile app and move that over to a DevOps style cadence. And we're going to learn from that. We're going to figure out how it fits our culture and we're going to make that work. And then we're going to go over to this other website that we have and we're going to start moving it to that type of cadence. DevOps works when you need to constantly re-release. If you're in a business that does not need to be agile, like, I work for a timber company and we cut down trees and we have software that keeps track of the trees we cut down. And we have changed that software 0 times in the past 500 years. You probably don't need DevOps. It's not going to give you anything useful. DevOps is a way of getting change out quickly and safely. And the safe part of it comes from the quick part of it, not the other way around. And so you really have to look at that type of need. You have a need for this type of agility in your organization. So I'm a traditional systems engineer. What are some practical first steps to becoming relevant and upskill to the DevOps model? Excellent question, Mike. We've got, I don't think it's published in the Pluralsight library. So for those of you who are Pluralsight subscribers, I've got one more course coming on a DevOps big picture path. And it's a very vendor neutral, technology agnostic look at what capabilities support the DevOps approach. So if you fixed your org chart, what things do you need to be able to do? Things like master a continuous integration stack, master a testing automation framework. So it's those types of capabilities. And they're all big picture courses. They're all very short, about an hour. And it really just kind of sets you on, here's the physical moving parts in a DevOps organization without forcing you into a particular brand name or something else. So that's a good first step. Once you you have yourself oriented, you can start engaging. You're like, okay, well, I know our organization is going to be looking at continuous integration, so I'm going to go look at the 5 or 6 different products in that space. And we do have courses for some of the bigger ones, the more market-leading ones in that space. But that's what it is. That's what you want to do is start looking at the capabilities that are a little bit different in that type of an organization. And remember, the goal of DevOps is the developer checks in their code, a miracle occurs, and the code is deployed. And so the role of DevOps, the DevOps engineer, if you insist on using the title, is to make the miracle occur. So what do you have to do so that when the developer checks in their code, automated tests run, the thing gets deployed or it gets kicked back? What are all the steps there? Those are the things that operations folks need to support and provide. What else? We compare org charts that you can glance at and judge as does DevOps or does not DevOps. I can, we don't have a slide line, but let me find this. I'm going to search for a website real quick because there's a really good one with some example websites. It's called DevOpsTopologies.com. So if you punch that into your web browser, and the thing that I really like about this too, and we link to it from devopscollective.org, which is my website. The thing that I like about this is it recognizes that there is no one true way to do DevOps. There are different org charts that have a varying likelihood of success. There are ones that are pretty likely to succeed at meeting the goals of being agile and quick and flexible. And there are org charts that are less likely to lead to success in that. And you're doing DevOps if you're able, if a coder can walk up to you, I look at your org chart, you're like, yep, that looks like a DevOps org chart. But the real test is this. If a developer, whoever's writing code, even if it's a systems engineer writing infrastructure code, if they can walk up and say, hey, I've got a new release ready to go, I pushed a button, and you said, okay, well, if you push the button, then it'll be in production shortly once it passes its tests. If that's happening, then you're doing DevOps. That's really what that means, is shortening the glide path between the coder and the person who's consuming that code. And so that's how you can tell. But these DevOps topologies help describe team topologies as well as what they call anti-types, org charts that definitely will not lead to that type of a success. How do you see DevOps integrating into dev when ops cycles are shorter? Once the infrastructure is set and configured, you're pretty much done. I don't actually think that once the infrastructure is set and configured, you're pretty much done. I think that if you look at something like Elastic Beanstalk, which is an Amazon Web Services offering, I think that's the prototypical example of perfect DevOps. The way Elastic Beanstalk works is a developer checks in their code to GitHub or something like that, and they've got a folder in their code that's called environment. And in that environment folder, in a particular format, they list out the packages and dependencies and all the other stuff that their app needs to run. See, the problem we've always had, and the reason DevOps became a thing, is because developers would hand us their code. Operations folk, I say we because I'm an ops guy, operations would take that code, we'd try and deploy it into production, it would break horribly, that we'd go back to the developer and they're like, oh, well, yeah, you got to have such and such a DLL, man, didn't you know? And we're like, no, you didn't tell us about that. DevOps is designed to take that conversation out of the picture. That conversation never happens. The developer programmatically indicates what their tool needs to run. They programmatically put together their automated tests. So when there's a new deployment, the infrastructure isn't set and configured. You spin up a brand new infrastructure. And that's what happens with Elastic Beanstalk. When you say, okay, there's a new thing, go, it goes up to GitHub, it checks out the code, it pulls it down, it spins up virtual machines, it adds whatever packages the developer has specified, it sets environment variables and all the other goofy stuff that the developer has specified. It deregisters the old infrastructure from the load balancers, registers the new infrastructure with the load balancers, and then destroys the old infrastructure. The infrastructure is dynamic. Every time you do a new deployment, you get new infrastructure. So the role of ops in a DevOps is to make all that magic happen. So for Elastic Beanstalk, Amazon is taking on the role of the DevOps engineer for you. They've set the miracle up so that it just runs automatically. And I think that's an important thing there, is that agility applies to the infrastructure just as much as it does to the applications. So if you're hosting the application, then that infrastructure should be a fresh new thing every time you deploy it. And that, incidentally, is how you do a multi-stage pipeline. A developer checks in their code, I spin up a whole test environment based on their specifications. I run their automated tests. If that works, I destroy the test environment, spin up a production environment, deploy the app, because now I know the deployment will work because I've tested it. So the infrastructure is a constantly changing thing. What else do we have here? How do you manage project priorities with wanting to implement DevOps? My org is working on several projects that need to be delivered on time to ensure the business is competitive, which is a whole reason for DevOps, get it out there quickly, and stay ahead of the competition, so stay agile. While the team is business delivering the project, I need their time and support to change how they do software development and adopt DevOps. How do we juggle those two things that are equally important? This is called investment. At some point, you have to decide, we're going to adopt a slightly slower cadence so that we can get our feet under us and learn how to do this thing, and that investment will pay off later. but you can't have all the things at once. You have to start somewhere. You know, if you're a little 5-year-old kid just entering kindergarten, you're like, wow, I really want to be a biologist, you know, but I've only got so much time. Well, you're going to have to do it step by step. You're going to have to go through high school. You're going to have to go through college. You can't skip those steps. So for the business to say we want all the things all the time is unreasonable. And that's a cultural thing, and that happens a lot. It's good to have goals, but you also have to recognize reality. If we're going to be changing our approaches, then we're going to be burning some overhead in that process. And so you're not going to get your rapid deliveries. However, if you invest and we do make that investment and we do get our feet under us and we do move over to this new footing, then you will get faster deliveries than you can possibly imagine. So it's worth that investment. And it's worth partnering with some folks who've you know, done things before and can guide you along. Bring someone on who's done this before. How does one handle DevOps between unclassified and classified environment? The development happens in the unclassified environment. Deployment needs to happen in a classified environment where it has to deploy database, run tests against real data, and so forth. Any guidance, best practices? Really, all this is just based on your automation. I mean, how the data gets handled, where the environment is physically spun up, that's all things that you should be able to automate. If you need, you know, the test environment spun up in a particular way, then you build your automation that way. And the idea is that and here's why you can't go buy DevOps in a box, open the shrink wrap, get a DVD out of the box, and install DevOps. Because every single organization has unique needs like this. Every single organization needs something slightly custom. And so what you're going to wind up getting to implement these DevOps approaches is a toolbox. You're going to get continuous integration tools like Jenkins or TeamCity. You're going to get container management tools. You're going to get VM management tools. You're going to get the tools that let you work out the exact pipeline you need in your environment. And anyone who tells you, oh no, you can just buy it from us and it's all turnkey, they're lying to you. It's only turnkey if you agree with their approach. So get used to building a lot on your own by sticking blocks together and gluing them together to get the exact pattern you need. But knowing that that's what you need and really understanding your process up front, that's the first step. What phases would you recommend for a large traditional enterprise which is moving to cloud and attempting to embrace DevOps? Start small. First of all, have a very honest and open discussion about what DevOps means. Make sure that you've got executive buy-in from the very top, because there is going to come a time when you are going to deploy and it is going to break, and you're going to have downtime. We always have downtime. The idea with DevOps is to reduce the downtime, not eliminate the downtime. It's to embrace the fail and recover quickly. So you have to have that discussion with the CEO on down. Once everybody's on board culturally, start small. Pick a project that maybe doesn't need a high level of agility and is maybe not the most mission critical thing you have, so that as you screw up and you learn from your mistakes, you're not wrecking the company and stressing everyone out. But start with something small. And I think that's probably the best way to get there. Now, Lindsay, you've got a couple of poll questions lined up. I'd like to do at least one of those just to kind of get a feel for where everybody's at in the audience. Can we push one of those?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a poll here on, it's been said that there's no such thing as an actual DevOps team, just a DevOps approach or a DevOps movement. So in your, right in the middle of your screen, you can click on agree, disagree. If you're unsure, let us know your opinion. We'll give everyone a couple of seconds to answer that.
And while they're doing that, there's a good one here. How do we do DevOps and still maintain audit requirements like PCI, TL, SSEA? There is no, DevOps is a way of getting code out faster. There's nothing about it that stops audit requirements or privacy laws or anything else. All of your, things like PCI compliance, those come from adherence to a process. So, for example, I would imagine that in an organization that was producing, let's say, a mobile app that accepted credit card numbers and you had to be PCI DSS compliant for some reason, I imagine that many of your automated tests would be testing for specific PCI compliance points. You know, can I feed code in or a number in, and is it automatically encrypted? Are communications HTTPS, right? You have your criteria for what makes you compliant, and so you write automated tests for those things. What that means is you should be able to deploy new code all the time, and your automated tests will ensure that you're hitting those criteria. If your auditing requirement requires, you know, that an app behave in a certain way, you write tests for those things to make sure that it is behaving that way on every new release. So it's really just understanding that whatever it is you need, you automate. You don't manually audit. You automate all of those things so that when an auditor comes in, they go, well, look, we need to make sure this is happening. Yeah, it is definitely happening. You can look for yourself, but we know it's happening because we automated it. It's impossible for us to release unless it's happening. So a little over, close to 3/4 people agree that there's no such thing as a DevOps team, just a DevOps approach. I agree. I think the subtlety here, and this is what a lot of folks miss when they say these words, you can have a team that is organized according to the DevOps approach. But what you don't want to have in your org chart is a bunch of developers on one side, a bunch of operations people in another building, and then a DevOps team that somehow makes the two work together. That's an anti-pattern. If you go to devopstopologies.com, it's one of the most common anti-patterns. Well, we want to do DevOps, but we've only got 2 really smart people on staff, so we're going to make them the DevOps team. And they'll build out a continuous integration pipeline, and it'll all work really well. And that's not it. And that's why I said I can tell if you're doing DevOps by looking at your org chart. It's very much an org chart thing. So yeah. What else we got here?
Well, so the other poll actually.
Oh,
go ahead.
Okay,
no, actually, I was just going to say the other poll kind of contradicts that. It wants to know if you consider yourself on that DevOps team or not. So I'm not sure if we want to ask that question.
No, I kind of do. So let's just rephrase it on the fly, though. Are you currently working on a team that implements DevOps approaches? And so a team that is using DevOps. Take a couple seconds to answer this. I've got a good question in here. Since DevOps is closely associated with microservices and containers, which are also misunderstood, agreed, to what extent do you need to define what microservices and containerization means as a word or goal or pattern? So let's talk about why things like microservices and containers get associated with DevOps. It's because you've got a breed of startup company that has decided that things like microservices are the right way to deploy their code, and containers are the right way to deploy their code. Then, totally separate from that decision, they have taken a DevOps approach toward deploying that code, whether it be in a VM or a container, microservices, or whatever. So the only reason there's a close association is because you have a lot of younger startup lean companies that are using all of these things in combination. They really don't have any other coupling between them, though. I think what you need to do when you talk about anything is understand that there is a right tool for every job. There are jobs where spinning up old-style VMs is the right answer. There are jobs where containers are the right answer. There are jobs probably where a physical host running an operating system and an application is the right answer. So that's just an architecture thing. Just because you're using containers does not mean you're doing DevOps, and just because you're doing DevOps does not mean containers need to be part of your life. It's all about picking the right tool for the right job and then automating that. So hopefully everybody had a couple seconds to look at this. About a third of folks do work on a team that they think implements some DevOps practices. About half don't. But 12% aren't sure, which is probably one of the best answers you can have, because a lot of times it's hard to tell. So Lindsay, I know we're kind of coming to the end of the time here. I want to just point out to everybody, if you are planning to attend Pluralsight Live, please come to my session on what a functioning DevOps team actually looks like, where we talk about the different roles that are on the team and how they interact and how that impacts the larger org chart in the organization. And if you do come to that session, grab me afterwards and let's step out in the hall and talk about it. And I'd love to hear what you're encountering and talk about things I'm seeing other customers doing.
Yes, please, absolutely. I'm going to throw that promo code up again for everyone so that you can get a really great discount on the session. We have a lot of fun things planned. Also, just so you can do your homework beforehand, or if you're curious, there is a great article linked on the resource list section of your webinar console. It's called 3 Signs You're on an Actual DevOps Team. It's by Don Jones, and it's got some great insights into what it means to actually be on a DevOps team, goes a little bit more into detail. There's also some great links to the agenda, some other really cool assets and resources from Don. So we really hope to see everybody there. If you can make it, please come say hi. It's going to be a lot of fun. Don, do you have any closing remarks?
No, just a couple of other quick resources to point people to. The conference that I help run, which is specifically for the Microsoft space, it's around DevOps and PowerShell. You can find out more about that at PowerShellSummit.org. We do have a Fundamentals of IT Operations path, great starting point for someone who's getting into the field, and it really approaches getting started in IT with DevOps in mind. So there's bits of that scattered throughout. And then, as I said, like any minute, we should have a DevOps big picture path published on Pluralsight. So if you have a Pluralsight subscription or a trial subscription, that's a great thing to jump into. It's probably 8 or 9 hours worth of content, really chunked up into small bits. You could watch one a day over lunch if you wanted to. Just to give you an idea of what some of the things are, the capabilities and the tools that exist in organizations that are taking this approach, so that you can kind of orient yourself and then decide what you're going to study after that.
Awesome, great. I will send a link out to that path if we get it within the next week or two to everyone that registered as well. So keep your eyes on the horizon for that. That sounds awesome. So I just want to thank everyone for attending. And Don, I want to thank you for your time today. This has been really insightful and very helpful. So thank you again. There will be a survey that pops up at the end of this. It's like 2 questions long. We really appreciate your feedback. So thank you, everyone, and thank you, Don.
Thanks.